let's start it off, Congressman. I think let's start with Europe. That's something that I think you were there in March, from what I remember, and you had a few meetings there talking about they've got two acts, the Online Safety Act and EU's Digital Services Act. Now, I spoke to Tommy Robinson earlier today, and he said something fascinating, and I agree with him. He said the US is the last bastion fighting for free speech right now with the censorship that's happening in Europe. And I thought about it after he said that, and seeing what's happening in Europe. I've spent a lot of time in Europe. It's close to heart, and my hometown of Australia. He's pretty right, Congressman. Can you tell me more about your trip to Europe? What you've seen there? How are the discussions like?
Yeah, we were there 2 months ago, and it confirmed everything we suspected. It didn't alleviate any fears we had about the clampdown on free expression. I think in the UK in 2023, we just have a report. We got this hearing tomorrow, and I just had read this. I think there were 12,183 arrests for offensive posts online. So for things people say they're getting arrested for, it's like that is where this all leads. And I never forget, we had a journalist testify last Congress when we were looking at what we called the censorship industrial complex here. Well, I think Michael Schellenberger had labeled it that, big government, big tech, big media, big academia, all working together to censor speech. And we had a series of hearings, and one of our witnesses was a journalist from Canada, Rupa Subramanye, and she was so good. She covered the whole trucker blockade a few years ago and all the issues there. But she said the hallmark of Western culture is free expression. And when you lose that, the alternatives to settling disputes is frightening. And that's the concern we have. Is we have the First Amendment here. Europe doesn't have it, but they've had this common law tradition of free expression, free speech. And now that's being clamped down on. And the way it always works is it's always the government, in the name of misinformation, disinformation, who wants to censor people who are critical of the government. That's always how it works. And unfortunately, we're now seeing that play out in Western Europe, or across Europe. And that's a concern to us. And then the impact it can have on Americans as well.
Yeah, I think I'm going to give you a statistic that will shock you. And that shocked me. Everyone loves to criticize Russia for the censorship, the centralization of power we see there. We're believers in democracy and democratic systems. Russia arrested less than 500 people for what they've said online last year. That's Russia in the midst of the war in Ukraine. In the UK, it's about 3,000 people last year. 3,000. I look at some examples. I'd love you to give us some. I want you to give us examples as well, because people listening to this don't understand how bad it's gotten in Europe. Because they got worried in the US with the Twitter files that we've obviously covered heavily and you're very critical of. But then Trump became president and everything changed. But in Europe, it's just getting worse and worse. So there's yesterday a comedian by the name of, I'm not sure if you know this, Graham Linehan. Linehan.
Okay.
He posted a photo. He was detained at Heathrow Airport for the following. He's a comedian. He posted a photo of a trans right protest saying, "A photo you can smell." That's it. That's all he said. And he was arrested yesterday at the airport for making fun of people that are transgender. We got Bernadette Spofforth. She posted something on X for 1 hour, something on Twitter. She said the following about a stabbing suspect. She said, "If this is true, then all hell is about to break loose." That's all she said, Chairman. Yeah. And she deleted the post, and she's facing potential jail time. I think there's an investigation into this. And the list goes on and on. Yep. Only in Poland, I interviewed someone who's an MEP, a member of the European Parliament. He's facing potential jail time for liking a video. That was a few years ago when you could see who liked. He liked a video, Congressman. That's mind-boggling to me.
No.
When you had those conversations with those policymakers, I don't look at any politician as good or evil or good. What goes through their head? What were these conversations like? What was their intent?
No, great question. And of course, it's always, our goal is to protect kids from seeing offensive things, or people being abused or bullied or pro-suicide stuff. So those kind of messages. So it's always about protecting kids. Look, we're all for protecting children. We're all for that. But it never stops there. It's never just that. It's always the government who then says, we're going to censor people who are critical of us. And one thing I've learned is, today's misinformation is tomorrow's truth. We saw it during COVID. I just was giving a speech last weekend, and I made this point. Everything our government here in the United States told us about COVID turned out to be false. Every single thing. They said it didn't come from a lab in China. They said it wasn't our money used at the lab in China. They said it wasn't gain of function research done at the lab in China. All three of those things were wrong. They said the vaccinated couldn't get it. The vaccinated couldn't transmit it. They said masks worked. They said 6 feet social distance was based on science. And then they told us this was the first virus in history where there's no such thing as natural immunity. They were 0 for 8. But oh my goodness, if you criticize any of the things they initially told you, somehow you had to be censored. In fact, our own government, third day of the Biden administration, January 23rd, 2021, there's a email sent from the White House to Twitter, and it says, take down this tweet ASAP. And the tweet was, here's the irony of it all, from RFK Jr., the guy who would later run against Joe Biden's White House on the Democrat primary. And the tweet was about COVID, and nothing in the tweet, 3 sentences, nothing in the tweet was false. Nothing in the tweet was false. And yet they wanted it taken down. So it's always government who, in the name of protecting kids, which we all want to do, they use that as the excuse to censor their critics and censor people who might not even be saying anything false. Remember, our First Amendment allows you to say things that are accurate, but this was actually true statements, and they wanted to take it down. And it just so happened to be the guy who was going to run against them in the primary. Now he's on the other side, obviously working as HHS secretary in the Trump administration. But he also had the same name, he had the name Kennedy, the most well-known name in Democrat politics for the last 75 years, for goodness sake, and they went after him. So that's how bad this can get. And Europe is seeing it even more than we did under the Biden administration, and that's the scary thing.
How do you hope to change that? I know you can only do so much. Some people are talking about potentially sanctioning members of, I think it's called Ofcan, the regulator here there in Europe. What is it? Ofcan?
Ofcom, yeah.
Ofcom, there we go.
Yeah.
So first, is that an option? Could we see sanctions for members there? And what other options do you have? What tools do you have up your sleeve?
Well, first you highlight, you get the facts out there, and you show how ridiculous it is. Second, you use the trade talks. I mean, we had a conversation, Republican members who went to Europe a couple months ago, and we're looking at this issue. We were in Brussels, we were in London, we were in Dublin. We talked with Ambassador Greer. We talked with Secretary Letnick. We talked about these issues and the concern. The president and the vice president have been very clear. If you're gonna censor Americans, you're gonna censor speech. That's not how it's supposed to work in Western culture. You're gonna do that. That's wrong. We're gonna take that into account. And frankly, if you're gonna go the next step also, which is go after American tech companies, which frankly have changed. I mean, when Elon bought Twitter, I mean, the change there now, it's a place where the First Amendment and free speech are right where they need to be. But even Mark Zuckerberg sent the committee a letter last August, sent us a letter and said the Biden administration pressured us to censor. We did it. We're sorry, and we're not going to do it in the future. And they've now subsequently changed their policies. They went to the community notes approach, not this independent fact checker baloney. So things have changed here. So you highlight it all, but then you also use the trade talks when you're talking about European countries who are looking to censor American speech and frankly shake down American tech companies, which is exactly what the Digital Markets Act looks like. Its design is. So you use every lever you have.
I remember J.D. Vance's speech warning the EU a few minutes ago. Your biggest enemy, something along the lines of your worst enemies from within, when everyone's looking at Russia. That was an incredible speech. I was interviewing George Zerg. You remember what happened? Yeah, what happened in Romania? And they asked to censor conservative voices there. They canceled an election. So the speech was a day before I interviewed George Simeon, who almost became the president. And it just shook the entire establishment there in Europe. Now, the reason that matters to you as a U.S. congressman and the chair of the Judiciary Committee is that now they want to find the American companies, some of them like Reddit don't even have offices in Europe, for things that users are posting on these platforms. But these are American companies. Now, they're not small fines. Fines up to 10% of revenue. Now,
yeah, global revenue. That's a lot of money these companies make.
Well, Congressman, how does this work? Is that just a negotiating tactic to get you there to negotiate for something else? Or are they genuinely serious for this? Are they genuinely serious about fines up to 10% of global revenue?
Let me read you something. This came from, this was last August 12th, 2024, Brussels, a letter sent to Elon Musk. And this was the former head of the EU Commission who oversees and enforces the Digital Services Act, the Digital Marketing Act, a gentleman named Thierry Breton, a Frenchman who was part of the EU. I just want to read the very first sentence. It says, "I am writing to you in the context of recent events in the UK." So remember last summer, it was all about the immigration issue and this terrible crime that had happened in the UK. "I'm writing to you in the context of recent events in the United Kingdom and in relation to the planned broadcast on your platform X of a live conversation between a US presidential candidate and yourself." Okay, that's the first sentence. So he says he's writing to an American about an American company, about an American election, and he says the context are about events and people's comments about those events in a non-European Union country, the UK. So this is where Europe is trying to police everyone. And then if you don't follow their rules, he says at the end of his letter here, "I therefore urge you to promptly ensure the effectiveness of your systems and report measures taken to my team, and I will not hesitate to make full use of our toolbox. I will not hesitate to fine you, to come after you, to make life." And they've tried to, your EU is doing that to X as we speak. So that is what's at stake here. And so the hearing we're having tomorrow is to highlight all this and say, this has got to stop. You guys need to stop it for just the benefit of Western culture and free expression. But we're concerned because of that, but also the impact. He even uses the term, the spillover effect. Mr. Breton used that in his letter to Elon, the spillover effect it can have on American content being seen by European users. That is the problem. And that is not how our First Amendment works. And then I think the added to all this is all the big tech companies are American. They're not shaking down any European countries. They don't apply under their law. The way it's all defined, it's only the big six companies in the United States. They want their money. So it's a form of taxation as well that I think the EU is looking to do to American companies.
When you bring up that letter to the people you spoke to in Europe, what is their response? Like, is there a logical explanation? I try to always see the other side. Is there a logical explanation they give you?
No, another good question. It's funny. The person who's replaced Mr. Breton. So he sent this letter to Elon Musk last summer. We responded back to him. Our committee did. We sent him a couple letters. He then resigned. So he left. I think he left because of maybe the pressure of all this. It was that the letter that we had sent over there was printed in some of the European papers. So he left. The new person there, Miss Verkunen, she's now the enforcer for the EU when it comes to the Digital Services Act, the Digital Markets Act. And she says, "Oh, Mr. Breton is gone. He no longer applies." But look, the law hasn't changed. It's the same act that he was alleging he can do these things, use his toolbox, and then he's telling an American about an American company regarding an American election, what you can and can't say. And it was a threat. It was a threat before the interview that Elon had with President Trump even took place. It was a threat. None of that's changed because the law is still the same. So she could do, she could do the same thing. I believe. In fact, this is one of the issues we're going to talk about in tomorrow's hearing.
One thing is fascinating, Chairman. I want to ask if you've spoken to the patient about this. So what I've seen is that on both sides, left and right, power corrupts. We've seen that all across the world. In Europe, everyone's criticizing this act, and now the Labour Party is in power. But before that was the Conservatives, and they've been in power for years before that. They're the ones that created that law. Yeah. So, and we've seen that across Europe. Now, in the US, it's been an incredible thing to see that President Trump, despite him being the president and having a lot of support, he's still fighting for free speech. He's not leveraging his power to censor. That's, you can criticize the president for many things, different policies, but that's an incredible thing that I hope continues. Two questions I have for you is, have you spoken to the president about what's happening in Europe? And the second is, can you tell me more about your discussions in Europe? Because should we have hope, or you went back, you came back home saying, "Holy crap, like things are a lot worse than I thought"?
Yeah. No, we should have hope because there are people in both the UK Parliament and of course in the EU Parliament who I think now understand, like, maybe this law, while having good intentions, again, we're all for protecting kids, maybe this does go too far. Maybe there's a problem here. So I do think there is hope there. And I have spoken to the president. He put out a couple nice posts on Truth Social where he basically said, Digital Service Act, Digital Marketing Act, we're going to take these things into account when we're doing trade negotiations. Free speech is important, and you can't be using these acts as a way to shake down American companies and limit Americans' rights under our First Amendment. So that post was like I talked to him last week, and there was a post within like the last week or so of that. So within the last couple of weeks, it was a really strong post he made on this very subject. So I talked to him about that and thanked him for it.
Do you worry that we could see the same things happening in Europe again in the US? So what I always try to understand, what happens behind the scenes. So right now in the US, we're seeing, again, a fight for free speech for the First Amendment. But then if you go back to prior to Trump, under the Biden administration, we saw the Twitter files, we saw all the pressure that Mark Zuckerberg and others have faced. And what Elon faced, we had, you did an investigation into one of the organizations that tried to get, can you tell us about this? It got advertisers to boycott X. To try
GARM.
Exactly. Can you tell us about what did they do to X? What was the strategy there?
Well, no, it was funny because it was Elon who first told me about GARM. We were looking at the Twitter files. We were looking at things we saw the Biden administration doing relative to COVID and election comments. And we were digging into all this, interviewing, doing depositions of people in academia and everything else. But I was in a meeting with Elon. He said GARM, it's called Global Alliance for Responsible Media. But he said it should be called HARM. And I remember that. And we started digging in. And they were bad because they would form this group and say, oh, it could be a reputational risk or a risk to your brand if you allow this conservative platform, this conservative outlet to advertise, or if you would advertise on their platform, risk. And they would do all these labels and make it tough for conservatives to get advertisers, to run their business, for goodness sake. So we dug into it. Now they've disbanded because we caught them like red-handed, just showing how biased they were, how against speech they were, what they were trying to do. The other thing we should never forget is during the Biden administration, I think it was April of 2022, they established the Disinformation Governance Board, as if a bunch of bureaucrats can tell you what you can say, what you can read, what you can tweet, what you can post. I mean, that's what they were attempting to do. And again, I always say today's misinformation is always tomorrow's truth. And government labeled misinformation always turns out down the road to be, typically turns out not to be accurate. But there was a bureaucracy formed in the Department of Homeland Security that was going to monitor misinformation, monitor American speech. Now, we raised a big stink about this. You guys out there in the media did so too. Conservatives all over the country, and it was disbanded, thank goodness. But they actually formed it. That's how bad it can be. So again, you just always have to stay on it. Always highlight it when you see it, and point out the dangers if you lose. I always say if government takes away, under our First Amendment, you know this, 5 fundamental rights. Right to practice your faith, right to assemble, right to petition the government, free press, free speech. Most important one is the last one. Most important one is our right to talk. Because if you can't talk, you can't practice your faith, you can't share your faith, you can't petition the government, and you don't have a free press. It is the most important one. And that's the one that they always go after. And it's why it's so important you keep doing the good work you're doing and others and highlighting this concern.
Do you remember, a lot of people forget, the president of the United States had his account banned.
Yes.
Like where it is, that I think we're very complacent now, and we're looking at Europe, thinking, Europe is a mess. But like, it's important to keep that pressure up and thank you for what you do. In the US, kind of the pinnacle of democracy, especially when it comes to free speech.
Well said.
So I hope this doesn't change in future administrations, whether it's a Republican or Democrat. I do want to talk about something else that just come up as well. I wasn't planning to talk about this. We're seeing a bit of a split, something you don't talk a lot about. So I want to get your thoughts. And a split within MAGA when it comes to foreign policy, especially the war in Gaza. Now, the war in Gaza is something for me, I've gone deep into it. On one side, October 7th is terrible. On the other side, Gaza's just bombed to hell. I know you don't spend a lot of time on this issue. You have enough on your plate.
Well,
but looking at it, go ahead. I'd love to get your thoughts on it. But more importantly, what's happening within MAGA? We've seen some voices like Tucker have been critical of Israeli influence on U.S. foreign policy, and others have kind of always said, Israel's a strong ally of the U.S., and the U.S. should continue supporting Israel as it has over the years. Would love to get your stance. And then I want to remind you of the comment that Trump made yesterday. I'm sure you've seen it, to the Daily Caller yesterday, about the Israeli lobby. So he said, I'll read out the exact quote. I woke up to this, so it's brand new to me. He said, Israel had the strongest lobby in Congress of anything or body, of any company or corporation or state that I've ever seen. Today, it doesn't have that strong of a lobby. It's amazing. And he keeps talking about how that war is starting to hurt the support Israel has in the US. What are your thoughts since October 7th? Has that changed as you put, your America first hat?
Yeah, no, I'm as pro-Israel, strong Israel supporter as you could possibly be. I think there's a special relationship, Mario, between our country and the state of Israel. My wife and I have been there. We've traveled there 6 times. We went back in February. We were asked to take a group of members and their spouse. We took 10 members over there and had a wonderful trip. It was a tough trip because we went and visited, the concert site. We went and visited some of the kibbutz areas down right on the Gaza border. Tough trip, and we were all the way in the north and saw what Hezbollah was doing in the north to communities in Israel. So we're strong supporters. I do think there's just this special bond that exists. And again, I make no bones about it. I think part of it's just this Judeo-Christian connection. We're evangelical. We believe strongly in supporting our strong ally Israel. I do know that there are some in the Republican Party, friends of mine, who take a slightly different position. I respect those people as good Republicans, good individuals, and good friends, but I just disagree with them. I think we should be unwavering in our support for the one true friend, true democracy. I mean, you look at the history of what they've been through to become a nation and everything else. It's really a fascinating, I always call it the miracle that is the state of Israel. So I do think there's a special connection there, and we should support him. And I appreciate President Trump, his unwavering support of the state of Israel as well.
Does it worry you that split we're seeing with the MAGA, and obviously Tucker Carlson being the best example, Candace Owens and others, does that concern you at all?
Yes, yes, because it's there used to be just strong support for, again, the one democracy in the Middle East, the country that we're so close to. Of course, outside of Israel, the largest Jewish population is in the United States. So it's I think we just got to remember it's a special bond. And some of the things we saw from the Biden administration, I just thought I will never forget that. This is maybe not directly on point, but it just popped into my mind. We're at the State of the Union address probably a few years ago. So it's I guess it'd be 3 years ago, maybe right after the terrible events of October 7th. And whenever that next, it must have been in January, February, so a few months later. And I still remember Joe Biden saying we're going to put a temporary port in Gaza and bring supplies in. And I'm like, this is in the middle of the war. I mean, and I'm like, I said to a colleague of mine who next to me, who's a West Point grad, I said, isn't it kind of warfare 101? If you want one side to win, you don't give supplies to the other side. Now, I'm all for humanitarian help, but this is in the heat of the battle, and they're giving supply. I just did not understand that. Did not understand the position of the Democrats, and we know that they're hard left. The position they've taken, we see it on campuses and everything else relative to the state of Israel is a pretty scary position that the left has.
So there's 2 topics that have kind of caused a split within MAGA, and they're both pretty difficult topics. That's why they've caused that split. So one of them is what's happening in Israel, Palestine, in Gaza, and Iran, Lebanon, etc. And the other one's the Epstein files. I know that got a lot of traction. I've heard your comments on it. What have you seen so far? Do you have any unanswered questions? Is there any recommendations you make to the president? Where do you stand on this saga?
I think the country deserves to get information, and we're facilitating that in our committee. We're going to have the FBI director in. He'll be in and testify in front of our committee in 2 weeks, making his sort of annual trek to Capitol Hill. That the director of FBI always comes in front of the Judiciary Committee and answers questions. We'll have the Attorney General early next month, so in 4 weeks. Attorney General Bondi will be in front of our committee, and I'm sure she's going to get questions about this subject and a host of others. I know the questions I'll be asking are in regards to information that both Cash and Pam have released relative to Adam Schiff leaking classified information, according to a whistleblower. I want to talk about that, find out about that more. So we're going to have them in. The Oversight Committee under Chairman Comer has already subpoenaed the documents, already deposed witnesses, and they got more documents to get and more witnesses to depose. So yeah, that's all happening. We'll get the information and we'll go on. I am confident President Trump didn't do anything wrong, because if in fact there had been something, You don't think the Democrats would have brought this up over the last 10 years? They've lied about this guy, attacked this guy. You don't think that they had something in the files that had brought that up, for goodness sake? So I'm not worried about that. And I know that the Oversight Committee is getting the information. So I think that's the way to proceed.
Have you faced any challenges as you try to get that information? Because, as I dug into the story to try to really understand it, because I've been watching it from the outside, there's just too much going on to really go deep. And I started, researching it over the last 2 weeks. And it's just, the story is just hard to really fathom over the last 20 years, how we got here. We have prosecutor, I think it was, dropped severe charges on Epstein just by having 40 witnesses about 10, 15, 20 years ago.
By the way, that guy's coming in for a deposition.
Oh, beautiful.
Mr. Acosta.
Yes.
I think sometime later this month. It's this month, but it'll in a couple weeks.
Okay, that's going to be really interesting. First, have you faced any challenges? I'm going to ask you a bit more questions, not about Epstein, but more about how things work behind the scenes. How does these cogs operate in that machine? That's what really fascinates me. A lot of people in the audience listening. How do you do what you do? So first, was there any challenges at all as you move forward with the hearing in a few weeks?
No. I mean, I'll be honest with you. The main question, I was over the recess, the August break. I was traveling for helping colleagues, and we were in like 6 different states over 8 days, just 2 weeks ago. And one of the main questions I get all the time is, and they'll just ask it. You were kind the way you ask it, but they'll just ask it. Hey, Jordan, when is someone going to jail? Because they're so fed up with all the, with Comey, McCabe, and Strzok, and Page, and Clapper, and Brennan, and all these people. And then the latest information we just got from Tulsi about how they changed the intelligence community assessment. They changed the report back in December of 2016, between Election Day and Inauguration Day for President Trump. They changed the report to make it say something that the experts said wasn't accurate. And they got away with it, for a while. And that created the Mueller and everything else. So that's the main question I get. So again, what we have to do in the legislative branch, we have a constitutional duty to do oversight of the executive branch. And we just got to do that. Now, we can't prosecute anyone. This is the answer I give every single time I get that question. We can't prosecute anyone. We can't indict anyone. We can get the facts. We can then propose legislation, changes to the law, and we can refer people for prosecution if we think it's warranted, which we have done in the past. That's all we can do. Only people who can prosecute, of course, and indict anyone is the Justice Department. And it looks like Pam on this issue about changing the intelligence report, Attorney General Bondi has set up a task force specifically designed to look into this. I think John Brennan, I think, definitely said things to our committee that were not accurate over the years. Maybe that's something that's going to be examined a little tighter. So all that, but our job is to dig into it, do the depositions, do the work, get the facts, and then look and see if we can either legislatively or using the power of the purse change how things operate.
Last question on this issue, and not only about Epstein, but again, just how things work. For someone like yourself, you're very, I was looking forward for this conversation because you're very passionate in what you fight for. But someone like yourself, how much don't you know? Is there times where you look at something like, because there's all these different organizations and unelected officials and then the government, you can call it the swamp or anything you like. How powerful is it? How big is it? Because some people make it seem like it calls all the shots. I'm definitely not in that camp. Others just kind of say, guys, it doesn't even exist. Everything the government says is truth. You just got to believe all these different organizations and officials. But someone like yourself, Congressman, as the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, is there things you look at, you're like, what the hell's going on there?
A couple thoughts came to mind as you were asking the question. One is, I've said this many times, I've probably had the opportunity to be involved in more of these big investigations over the years when the IRS was, going after conservative groups. I was on the Benghazi Select Committee, the impeachment stuff that they did, the crazy stuff they did against President Trump, and then on and on. So the one thing I always say is, the only thing we get wrong at the start is it's always worse than we thought. It is always worse than we thought. As bad as we think it is, it's always worse. Now, that doesn't mean I think there's some swamp that's running everything. I just think that it means the swamp is real and it is bad. I still think the people who get elected, by and large, run things. I mean, that's our great country. I think that's how it works, and I believe in that. But there are people at the highest levels. We know what the FBI was, what Comey, McCabe, and Strzok and Page, what they all did. We know Comey leaked classified information again, and he did it as in an effort to create this Mueller investigation, all to undermine and sabotage President Trump. We know that happened, and you get in and start seeing how they did it, the games they played with the media, leaking to the media, then using what the media wrote as a basis to go get a FISA warrant. I mean, it's like, what? They actually did all that? So it always seems worse than it is. Now, the good news is we're an amazing country. We, the people of this great country, figure it out in the end, and they elect people who are in there doing things the right way. It's an amazing place, and so I see all that as well. Again, our job is just keep doing our job, keep digging in there and getting the facts, so that good guys and folks like you who are digging in there, getting the facts, and making sure the country understands. And that's why, again, we're kind of come full circle. Why the First Amendment's so important. Because if you dig up the facts and you're not allowed to present them because some government's going to, fine you, or worse yet, impose some criminal penalty, that's when it gets. That's why this is so. This First Amendment thing is so darn important. And this idea that they were going to, I keep coming back to Disinformation Governance Board. To me, that is the most Orwellian thing I've ever seen. You got to be kidding me. So that's what we try to do.
Just imagine so we've seen that in Brazil. I know you were very active there as well. I've interviewed President Bolsonaro. I've interviewed his son a few times, Eduardo. And just when I interviewed the president, Chairman, people like to criticize the US. I don't think they understand how bad the world outside of the US is. Brazil's meant to be a democracy. When I interviewed Jair Bolsonaro, so he was worried to use his Twitter account because he was worried to go to jail. Rightly so. Look what he's facing jail now. That was number one. Number two, his Wi-Fi was cut off, so he had to use Starlink. Luckily, there was Starlink in Brazil. Number three, when we started the show, there was a DDoS attack on the show to try to crash it. And then Twitter helped us make sure it doesn't crash. And then my account was banned in Brazil. Well, just imagine that level of censorship we saw in Brazil. If you go to Pakistan, which is another democracy in Pakistan, the former president is in jail right now. His three nephews are in jail for no reason whatsoever because he's going against the military establishment. His wife is in jail, solitary confinement, again, for nothing, for something even less. It was even not as bad as January 7th. So January 7th is overblown. That was even less extreme what happened there. And he's in jail. And same thing in Brazil. So when you talk about the fight you're fighting in Europe and in the US against censorship, I don't think people understand. It's like boiling a frog. It slowly creeps up, Chairman. It slowly creeps up until one day you're like, holy crap, like I have no privacy. Now they're requesting ID for things like Spotify, Xbox. You probably know this in Europe, right? Spotify, Xbox. I think Wikipedia. I don't know what other websites they request your ID. And then you get faced jail time for sending a tweet where you're upset about something and you say something. Romania is a democracy. I don't go to Romania. I don't go to Brazil. So that's why everyone watches the US. Not only is it the biggest economy, the biggest military, the biggest country in the world. Again, I'm from Australia. We look at the US as like a big brother. Everyone watches the US because if something happens in the US, that's what Twitter files were scary, then the rest of the world is pretty screwed.
Yeah.
And Europe is an example of that.
No, all well said. And it's, again, it's, God bless the folks who started this place and put together the Bill of Rights and the First Amendment. And we just got to protect it. We got to understand the answer to stupid speech, bad speech, and wrong speech is more speech. It's not limiting.
Exactly.
It's not defining misinformation, disinformation. They even had this term malinformation, which is they don't like the context. They don't like what it conveys. And by the way, the guy in Brazil, it's the Supreme Court justice, this head guy on the Supreme Court. That's the guy who's running things. He's the guy who's like the dictator down there, as far as I can see and what I've looked at. And he's the guy going after Mr. Bolsonaro. It's just like it's just wrong what they're doing. You have to have, as Rupa Subramanya, the journalist from Canada, said, the hallmark of Western culture is free debate, free expression. You make your argument, I'll make my argument. We might disagree. You have a vote, you move on. And if you can't settle disputes that way, with full and fair debate where you can get to the truth and you can get to the facts, the alternative is scary because it always involves force. It always does. And that's where throughout most of history, most people have went, but not Western culture and certainly not the United States. And that's what we got to preserve. And if we don't, it gets ugly fast. And we do not want that for people.
Before I move to the next topic, I have a question, Congressman. What would you say worries you the most right now? Not on the dinner table with your friends, when you're sitting down or going to bed. Is there one thing that keeps you up at night that worries you a lot at the moment? Is it maybe the war in Russia, what's happening in Gaza, or something domestic?
Well, I mean, you're always in this general, you're concerned about big international foreign policy issues. But, I don't have a direct, line on that. And we're involved in Congress. You have to vote for certain things. So there's always that concern. But I'll be honest, it's more about the debt problem we have in this country, which I think is real. But the most important thing that concerns me is the issue we're talking about. Because like I said, we have the greatest Constitution ever written, the Bill of Rights, your right to privacy, your right to speak, your right to your Second Amendment liberty, all the things we have. But the most important is the First Amendment. And the most important of the 5 rights, as I said earlier, under the First Amendment is our right to talk, for us to do what we're doing right now. And if the government gets in the way of that and says, you can't say certain things, you can't read certain things, you can't post or tweet certain things, and people can't, once they start doing that, and it can be all for good. We don't want that. I mean, I'm all for stopping illegal material out there for kids and everyone else. That's different. That's not what it's always about, just speech and being critical of the guy. That is frightening, because then pretty soon they're checking your bank account, making sure you're not spending your money on something you shouldn't be spending your money on, according to the government. That's when you lose freedom. And that's a scary place.
Yeah, it's not. At first, it's good to have someone like you in the government. I want to say that very explicitly. And it's not only freedom to speak, freedom of speech, but also freedom to transact. Some people are having their bank accounts frozen, and this is happening today. Not in the US, thankfully, but it's happening in Europe. It's happening in some Asian countries. I'm talking about democracies. But you did mention the debt. That I'm glad you mentioned that, because it's very kind of fashionable now to talk about some war, and these wars will always come and go, as heartbreaking as they are. But the national debt is another one of those kind of boiling a frog type problems. Now, I spoke to Senator Rand Paul not long ago about this. The numbers are staggering. And I'll read out something that the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, so Mike Mullen, said a few years ago now. That was in 2010, 15 years ago, when he was asked what was the biggest threat to the America's national security. He said the single biggest threat to our national security is our debt. Again, that was 15 years ago. That was $13.5 trillion. And the ratio of debt to GDP was 91%. Today, that debt is more than doubles, $36 trillion, Congressman, and it's 125% of GDP. So net interest payments since then have increased 600%. It doesn't seem, so when I spoke to the senator, it just seemed that, like when I asked him the question, like, why isn't anyone doing about this? And there's another show that you should come on. It's called the All In Podcast. They talk a lot about this. They're one of few that talk about it, because it's not really an interesting topic for the average person. They don't understand how serious of a problem it is. And I asked the question, like, why aren't the policymakers acting on this? Just because the system is flawed in some ways. Like, the voters always look at short-term results, what they get today, what's in their pocket today. That they don't really focus on long-term problems. This one's a long-term problem, and that becomes the next generation's problem. I'm glad this is a concern of yours. What are your thoughts? Are we moving in the right direction? The big, beautiful bill, it's got positive things, but it's also got it's added a lot more to that.
Yeah, I think the big, beautiful bill was a good bill. I always say, it was a good bill because the left hated it. And the left hated it because I believe it actually empowered people. It gave, more money. Largest tax cut in history. It gives more money to families and people, individuals. It gives largest investment in border security, school choice. I mean, you talk about empowering families. We now have in the tax code an element that actually encourages school choice, which I think is a good thing. The work requirement, also all good things there. But to the debt problem, like, number one, you got to get growth. We got to have stronger economic growth. I think we're on a path moving in that direction. Number two, we got to remain, the growth is all part of this, but remaining the biggest economy in the world, because that means you're going to be the reserve currency. That makes a world of difference. I think we'd be in big trouble right now, but for the fact that the dollar is the dollar. So you need that. So growth is critical. Once you start growing at a better rate, then you got to bend the spending down as percentage of GDP. It's got to start to come down. that sends a signal to everyone, and I think that keeps things rolling. So there's ways to actually begin to address it. But the nature, you ask, why haven't we done more? Just the nature of Congress, the nature of maybe human nature is such that you don't really deal with things until it happens, till it's almost a crisis. And we're fast approaching that. I hope we get the strong growth that will help us. We got to remain the reserve currency, and we're going to have to sort of scale back the growth and spending. Just scale it back a little, for goodness sake, would be helpful and help overall. But those are just some basic things. But I don't think you're going to see a solution to some of the entitlement concerns that are coming in the out years until we actually get real close to when they're going to happen.
Yeah, I think it's a good explanation when you compare it to human nature. Looking at anything like someone's health. You don't start taking care of your health until you're at the doctor's office. It's telling you like XYZ problem. So I think it's a very good comparison. Now there is another point of concern as well. Is that's the lawfare we've seen under the Biden administration, and I'm worried. Obviously, you'd be a much better person to speak about this if we should worry about it. But whether we could see the same thing under this administration. The only thing that got me worried is the raid on John Bolton's home, the FBI raid. Now, I don't know what they're looking for. Obviously, I don't know 99% of the information that we need to make a judgment. But what was your initial reaction to the raid? And are you worried that this is more politically motivated?
I'm not. I would just point out, think about what we've learned in the last 6 weeks. We learned that it looks like Comey and his chief of staff leaked classified information. Yeah, they had Comey memos and everything else. This has just come out. We learned from a whistleblower who came to Director Patel that it looks like, according to the whistleblower, Epstein Schiff was leaking classified information back in 2017, 2018, those years. We learned from ODNI Director Gabbard that, according to a whistleblower, they changed the intelligence community assessment. They changed the report. Initially, the report said all the professionals in our intelligence agency said that initially Putin said, I don't care who wins. I think it's probably going to be Clinton. And they changed that to no, Putin wanted Trump to win, and off and running they are. And then, of course, last week we learned about John Bolton. At least the judge felt that there was probable cause to do a search because John Bolton had mishandled classified information. And of course, to me, the irony is Comey, Brennan, Clapper, Schiff, Bolton, all these guys attacked President Trump and said he mishandled classified information. But he's the one guy as president of the United States who's allowed to label what's classified and what isn't, for goodness sake. None of these other guys, Bolton, Clapper, Brennan, Comey, Schiff, none of these guys are allowed to declassify anything. They're not allowed to leak classified information. And yet you got credible evidence that they did. So to me, I don't think this is about political retribution in any way. I think it's about accountability. And I've been in depositions with Mr. Brennan, Mr. Clapper. It was actually in a slightly different context. We were asking them about the 51 former intel officials who signed that letter back before the 2020 election, saying the Russian, the Hunter Biden laptop was a Russian information operation. Baloney, they had the laptop, for goodness sake. So I've been in these guys, the president can declassify, these guys can't. The one thing I'll also say about Brennan and Clapper, I mean, this is as an aside, I guess, they're maybe the two most arrogant individuals I've ever been around. I mean, the idea that, some hillbilly from Ohio was asking them questions was just like, how dare you bring me in and ask me questions about a letter I signed, which was baloney. So yeah, these are some bad guys who are in high positions in our government, but I do not think it's in any way retribution or, political weaponization. I think that's what they did. I think this is about accountability, and we'll see. I do believe, as I said earlier, I do believe Mr. Brennan wasn't square with us in a couple different settings. Maybe even that deposition, when I did ask him about a different issue, the dossier issue, last Congress, and certainly a few years back when he was getting questioned by Congressman Gowdy, I think he said some things that weren't accurate there as well.
Now, the last point I would bring up is something I didn't expect to be discussing in our interview, but something's gaining a lot of traction on both sides of the aisle, and that's what's happening in Washington. There's two sides to the argument. One is a crackdown on crime. I think most people agree that crime is an issue, even though it's at a 30-year low. I think it was in Washington at the time. It is still an issue nonetheless. And now we could see the same thing happening in Chicago. Mm-hmm. The others are saying that the last time the National Guard was deployed was in the 1960s by Lyndon B. Johnson. And obviously we saw that happen again in LA and now in Washington. What is your position on this? Because I agree with both sides. I think both sides make a good argument. Did that really warrant the action that Trump has taken to fight against crime? Did he need to go that far?
Well, I do think, under our Constitution, DC is a unique. It's the district of it's the district. It's not an entity in and of itself totally. We've given them some home rule ability the Congress has over the years, but it's the district. It houses the federal government. Our founders understood it was going to be a separate kind of special category. And I do think when you think about your capital city, our capital city, you want to place that safe. The number of carjackings and muggings and murders, it just was unbelievable. Those are all down now in the last 15, 16, 17 days that President Trump has had the
Yeah, 82% drop in carjacking.
Yeah,
which is a good number.
Yeah. So I do think DC is completely different. Although I think the folks in Chicago, families living in communities in Chicago, probably would appreciate federal law enforcement coming there to help stop the carjackings and murders and muggings in their town. So as long as it's for, that, it's funny to me because I think it's one of these issues where the Democrats always seem to take the wrong position, or the hard left always seem to take the wrong position. They're basically saying, no, don't give us any federal law enforcement, even though we got record crime in our community. We don't want less crime. We don't want, like, what? Of course they want less crime. Of course they want less muggings, less carjackings. You got to be kidding me. So I do get that, but I certainly think here in DC, definitely warranted. This is our capital city. We're coming up on 250 years of the greatest country ever. You want a capital that's safe for not just the people who live here, but people who come here. In the spring and the summer, this place is packed. Particularly, people come from the cherry blossom and everything else to see their capital. You want a place that's safe.
But what about the argument that this problem should be left for the states to deal with?
Ideally, you want that. I mean, crime is a state issue. But when you have these left-wing mayors who are simply abandoning the people in their community and saying, when I travel through airports, we typically will have a lot of times we'll have a law enforcement officer who will escort you in help. We work with local law enforcement. We're coming in and out. We let them know. Our staff does. And you talk to these guys, and they tell you the shortage in the number. Like, I forget, when I was in Chicago, I think last couple years ago, they were like 600, 700, maybe 1,000. It was a huge number. Police officers short of what they felt was needed, what they had to police their city. So when you got that kind of shortage, and you see what's happening to families who live there, and people who live there, and children who live there, I think it kind of makes good common sense. If you can do it and you can help them, I think that's probably a good thing. Certainly, it is in the capital cities.
Congressman, I want to ask you another question you probably wouldn't expect. It's probably the last topic I want to cover. It's one that's been fascinating me for a while. I'm fascinated by what's happening in China. I'm a believer of democracies. Against centralization of power. Obviously, free speech is an example of that. Something that I'm going to fight for as long as I need to. Now, but China economically is doing extremely well. And when I see all these issues that the US is facing, I look at what's happening there, and the lawfare that Trump has faced, the censorship that happened under the previous administration, and even all the disagreements that are happening now. I'm like, people criticize all the US for all these issues, but I'm like, this is how democracies function. Mm-hmm. That's my stance. That continues to be my stance.
Good.
But then I look at China. China's progressing so quickly, militarily, economically. And I've been looking at it for 10, 20 years now. I've been there a few times 20, 30 years ago for business. I'm looking at it, I'm like, this won't last. People would not accept an autocracy. But it continues to operate. One could say it'll continue working until it doesn't, until the economy starts to slow down. Yeah. People won't accept the inability to vote for who's in power. But does that worry you? Does that worry that China's kind of taking a different way of governing, one that me and you don't believe in, but one that is progressing so quickly, becoming the main threat for the US and for the rest of the democratic world? One could look at it as a threat, maybe an ally later on, but just from a systems perspective, does that worry you? And I kind of, to link it to the States, do you see flaws in how democracy functions in the US that you wish could be addressed? I think systemic flaws. I know it's a vague question, And I'll tell you my stance. I think the US is one of the strongest, if not the strongest democracy, despite all these flaws. But many people have disagreed with me and they make this point. So I'd love to get your thoughts on it.
No, I think I'm with you. I think the United States is the best system, best country. I mean, ever. I think you can almost make the argument. I think some people have made the argument that the folks, it's almost in this quest and belief and yearning for freedom is almost kind of in our DNA. Because you think about the people who started the country in Europe, they told them you got to practice your faith a certain way, and they said, "No, we don't. No, we don't. We will get on a ship. We will risk it all. We will come to this place called America, where we can practice our faith the way we think the good Lord wants us to, and if we're willing to work hard, we can chase down our goals and dreams." That's always been what this country has offered its citizens, and I think it's just that mindset, that individual rugged toughness. I always believe that America in the end is gonna prevail, and I know that's what President Trump believes. I say this all the time when I'm out on the stump, when I'm thanking people for supporting the president. I say what I love most about the president is he thinks like an athlete. He hates to lose. That is a good quality. You want a commander in chief, you want a president who plays to win. I think that's just Americans. Americans are about winning and setting goals and working hard. So I think we beat China in the end. I think they're a real threat. I'm concerned, but I don't think a totalitarian system beats freedom. I always feel like freedom wins. And I mean, maybe I'm just sort of apple pie and,
I hope
too, God bless America.
I'm with you. I'm with you. I believe that as well. It's just the pace of growth that they're having has been concerning. Obviously, I bring it up now with the meeting between Modi,
Xi and
Putin, Xi, exactly.
Yeah.
Not sure how far that worries you there. Obviously, I would like China and the US to work together. I look at China as like, hey, you can govern your country as you wish. We govern, or the US governs their country as they wish. Australia governs their country as we wish. But I do worry that one day, we are starting to live in a multipolar world, that those values clash somehow.
Yeah.
We'll see, and I hope President Trump navigates the way well over the next few years. But Congressman, we've discussed a lot of topics. I appreciate you've been open about everything. It's been really good.
How long do we go? I lost track of time. How long did we go?
we went an hour, exactly an hour.
Wow, this is the longest interview I've done in I don't know how long. I had a good time. So
I appreciate it. And I do want to say one thing, like your sincerity in fighting for what you fight for, the values that you fight for. You don't see this a lot in politicians. I remember I was speaking to Ambassador Tom Barak a few days ago. I'm not sure if you saw the comments he made in Lebanon to the journalists. He said something like, he made a comment. He said, don't be let's not act animalistic. Okay.
Yeah.
Now he's speaking his mind, and obviously he's trying to reach peace in the Middle East. One of the most difficult things for any human being.
Yeah.
And he said that comment as he was frustrated. He's an old gentleman. He's been through a lot. Very successful man. I looked at it as him being sincere and saying something off the cuff. President Trump does a lot worse. And I think this is a personality trait that I think people should appreciate more. I said this to him a few days ago because he was facing the backlash from those comments. I said, this is something that people should appreciate more, that level of sincerity when politicians speak their mind. And I think you've got that characteristic as I've been listening to you over the years. So it's been good to finally talk about all these different issues, and I hope we talk again.
Yeah, well, I look forward to it. Thanks for all the good work you're doing. Take care.
Thank you, Congressman. I appreciate it. Bye-bye.